Hello and welcome to the Wisepreneurs podcast. My name is Nigel Rawlins and I work with a range of women who are professionals in their field. They're often 50 to 60 years old who want to start their own business. In this podcast, I'll be interviewing a range of guests who will be able to tell you how they've done it themselves, and others who will give you hints and ideas and tips and maybe the confidence you need to go out and start your own business. I enjoyed speaking with our guest, Matt Dowling, the driving force behind the Freelancer Club. Matt has profound knowledge of his unique career path, making him a valuable guide for those venturing into freelancing. From personal experience, Matt knows the importance of setting clear goals and understanding business fundamentals. Matt shares how he accidentally stumbled into freelancing after university and faced challenges when a client went bankrupt and didn't pay him. This experience led him to start the Freelancer Club, a supportive community of around 60,000 members that offers resources, education, and camaraderie for freelancers. Matt's built a platform that connects freelancers, fosters talent, and promotes professional growth. His commitment to the freelancing community sets him apart as a respected leader, and in this podcast, he shares a wealth of insights I could have only dreamed of hearing about when I first started 20 years ago. Welcome to the Wisepreneurs podcast. Can you tell us where you're talking from today?
Yeah, great to be here, Nigel. Thanks for the invite. I'm calling you from London, England at the moment, where we are just starting to see break in the clouds and finally getting a little bit of weather for the summer.
Well, we're in winter here and it's been pouring all day, so hopefully I'll stay warm whilst we're talking. How did you get started on the Freelancer Club?
Well, when I came out of university many years ago, I accidentally fell into freelancing. It was based on a few opportunities that fell into my lap as I was unable to land the full-time job that I was trying to get at the time. So really had no clue what freelancing was or what it meant. And a friend asked me to take photos at his cousin's wedding. And the only criteria there for getting that job was that I owned a camera. And off the back of that, stumbled through it. Somebody at that wedding then asked me to come and do another shoot. That led to an estate agent asking me to shoot some things for their front window. And bit by bit, it just really started to gather pace. It was almost reverse engineered. I had to understand what freelancing was, that I had to register as a business, pay tax, set up a website, market myself. All of that came later. So it was very much a sort of happenstance, the whole freelancing career trajectory. And then I started to kind of run into some trouble. The moment I think that has somewhat defined the Freelancer Club, both in spirit and in origin, was a company that I had a great relationship with for about a year. I was shooting their content for fashion retail online. It's a bit like ASOS. If ASOS has permeated into Australia, it's a big online retailer. They would have been one of the first. And all was hunky-dory for a long period of time. And then the invoice didn't get paid 1 month. And that led on to a second month. And the excuses I heard were just an accountancy error, technical error. They were shifting programs. And so it all felt fine. We had a good relationship up until then. So there was no concern. But that then snowballed month 3, 4. And all the while I'm borrowing money from friends. At this point, to pay rent, I had pushed aside all of my other clients because I was so enamored with this one client and they had given me a lot of opportunity. And by month 5 or 6, it was dire straits. It was really hit rock bottom, in a lot of debt, barely enough money to get down to the studio to work for the company, who were still asking me to work for them. And it transpired that they had gone bankrupt and I had an 11 grand invoice that was overdue and never got paid. And with the last few quid I did have, I hired a lawyer to see what we could do. But unfortunately, we just got added to a list of folks they owed money to. And that was a real turning point, certainly. And then quite soon after that, a journalist got wind of the story and they published it in a national press here in the UK. And a lot of other freelancers reached out to say something similar had happened to them, not with the same company, but very similar outcome. And so it became a very peculiar time. I was thinking, that's it. I'm in debt. I'll need to pack up my bags, go back to Dublin, where I'm originally from, get a 9 to 5 and start paying everybody back. Whilst at the same time, I was offering advice to other people who were going through the same process. And we had formed this unofficial Facebook group of folks who had been through the mill. I was doing a lot of research around how to protect oneself legally and what rights we have, and going through those usual bits and pieces that you look for when scrambling to get paid. And that's, I guess, when the first seeds were planted for Freelancer Club, which was, there's not a lot of information out there. There wasn't at the time. And a lot of people are going through the same challenges, and that a ton of freelancers felt very unprepared. I didn't have a contract with this particular client, for example. That was naivety on my part and exploitation on their part. So that was probably first time I started to really get the wheels turning around the concept of Freelancer Club and what it would become a few years later.
That must have been pretty terrifying when you were in that much debt and wondering whether you should go out and get a job or not. I mean, how did you cope mentally?
Yeah, it's a funny one. When I went freelance, even in those first early years, a lot of friends used to say, you're either brave or stupid. They were the two things I tended to get back. And I never fully got that. I come from an entrepreneurial family. Everybody in the family works for themselves. So there was never that mental barrier for me to approach freelancing. So that idea of feast or famine, good weeks and bad weeks, fluctuating income, constant rejection and pitching yourself and hustling, that was all second nature. And very fortunately, I had the resilience inbuilt to deal with a lot of that. Now, although this was a more extreme case, and I had a great support network around me, a lot of great friends and family who were able to support by really just being there and listening to me rant about the issues more than anything, made a big difference. I got very fortunate, even from a financial perspective, following that newspaper article, when a couple of companies reached out and asked me to come in and tell that story and help their students, and started to form a new arm of my freelancing, which was a consultancy, probably more coaching, an informal way to come in and support aspiring freelancers. And I think that helped with my mental well-being at the time. I felt, okay, I'm able to stay here in the UK. I can rebuild this. The little money coming in, which, helped with the financial anxiety, and incredibly patient and supportive friends and family around me. So that bought me time. So it was tricky and a difficult period, but ultimately a great learning opportunity and a great time to be able to reflect on who you are, how you deal with these challenges, and hopefully set you up for the future.
Do you think it's you've got to have a personality or a certain type of personality to be able to cope with that uncertainty of money? Because I would assume that that's probably one of the biggest issues for somebody who's thinking, I've had enough of my job, got some skills, I'm going to go out and start my own business. And then they go out, and we'll talk about some of the issues they might be facing, but certainly have to be pretty tough or resilient to go out and say, right, I'm going to earn my own income, everything from scratch. What do you reckon for that?
Yeah, I put a lot of thought into this. We focus quite heavily on mindset when we're coaching and when we're teaching the next generation, but I don't think you need to have one type of personality or one set of characteristics. I think whether you're introvert or extrovert, whether you're a shy individual, outgoing, highly resilient or not, I think there are ways you can use whatever set of characteristics you've got to run a business and to freelance. But that said, I do think there are certain tools that are useful. We looked at a lot of the core triggering points as a freelancer. So I mentioned rejection. There's a hustle culture that I think can be pretty hard on a lot of individuals if you're not used to it. You think about someone who goes out and gets a job, a 9 to 5 job. You might interview 10 times. And if you get lucky, you'll get a job. And that could be it for a couple of years, even longer. For freelancers, you might be pitching for work on a daily basis. It could be that extreme, multiple times a day, and 95% of your proposals and pitches will be rejected, particularly in the early stages. And so to keep getting off the mat and going back out there and putting yourself out there just to land those first few early jobs in particular, that takes a lot of grit. And I think it takes a huge amount of resilience. Financial anxiety is another one we see a lot of in terms of fluctuating income, particularly for individuals that have come from a full-time role and would be very used to getting that paycheck in. There's a routine there. There's a security, an element of knowing what your money situation is going to look like month on month. To transition from that into the unknown can be very daunting. Certainly, in my case, it took a couple of years before I was comfortable, even taking a break. My friends would be off doing a holiday in the summer, and you'd have to turn it down because you'd have a fear of missing out on a client, or a fear that an existing client might use somebody else while you're away and not take you back. And it's funny, these fears and insecurities are quite tricky to teach. There's very little you can say to somebody. They almost have to experience it and see that it does work itself out over time. There are a few of these triggers that we've noticed, and we've done a lot of work around them as to how we can provide freelancers with a bit of a framework to deal with them when they pop up. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily one type of individual that will thrive as a freelancer, but simply knowing where the pitfalls are, I think can have a big impact for sure.
So I get the feeling though that somebody who's jumped out suddenly goes, oh shit, what am I doing? And a support group like yours can at least say, hey, reality is you've got to do these things. So are you finding with your membership, I think you've got about 50,000 members at the moment, or?
Yeah, just shy of 60,000.
60,000. That's fantastic. So they are very supportive of each other, and do they try and capture the new ones and get them in and help them?
Yeah, that's something we've tried to foster since launch. And we've done that really by a couple of traditional methods of really just chatting to people who we found to be active on the platform, getting to know them. There's no trickery to it. It's just a genuine and authentic curiosity about their journey, their goals, and seeing how we can help them. And we found that by doing that, it's nurtured a really organic culture within the community, members that do want to help and reach out. I remember freelancing myself many years ago, and there definitely was a sense and a culture of keeping your information to yourself for fear of, giving away secrets or a client or helping your competition. And thankfully, that seems to have dissipated quite a lot. Certainly in our community, we see a lot of established freelancers supporting the newer folks, and it has nothing to do with age. It's more just to do with experience. We've got a discussions board whereby members post questions that Google can't give them the answer to, very specific questions around a freelance topic, and it's great. Other freelancers will chime in and give their opinion. And equally, we have collaborative tools that enable our members to meet up in person and collaborate and create together, but also form groups and tribes and lean on each other and chat about freelancing. So yeah, I think it's all come together with this new way of being able to talk about mental health and challenges and well-being. That certainly wasn't the case growing up in Ireland in the 80s. But now it's wonderful that everybody feels a lot more confident and comfortable getting into the weeds around specific challenges that they're facing. And that's reciprocated and met with a really supportive community. So although we've done a bit to nurture it, I think the times has helped as well.
So remember when I used to be a teacher many years ago, more than 20 years ago, and I quit to start a business. And I'll be really honest, I had no idea what I was going to do, but I quit. And it's taken me some 20 years to get on top of it. But in those days, there was no one there to help us. No advice, no idea. What should I do? How do I do it? How much do I charge? There was none of that. And I was very lucky. I managed to find a mentor who really knew what he was doing and worked with me for 20 years until he passed away. The sort of organization you're talking about now is just brilliant for somebody who doesn't know where to look, doesn't know where to get help, and it's there. And I did look at your site today, and you've got a whole range of training and a whole lot of stuff there just to get them on the right track. I generally work with older adults, often 60 and older, believe it or not. What sort of age groups are you finding, or demographic groups are you finding on your site?
It's a real mix. And in preparation for this conversation, I wanted to look into those demographics and see where we're at. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that we have a healthy percentage of our members that fall into the category of 50 plus. And yeah, freelancing is such a fascinating area for this, because the stereotype, I think, when you think of a freelancer is probably someone relatively young with a laptop flying around the world with a mojito in their hand. And the reality is really not that up until recently. So only in the last few years has there been a big spike in the number of 16 to 24-year-olds entering the market. It's become an aspirational career option, and a viable one at that. At university level, we're starting to see a complete sea change in the number of students that are freelancing whilst they study, and a growing number of students that go on to freelance as a career straight out of uni. That was not happening a few years ago. And then we also have individuals that are keen to readdress their lifestyle. I think particularly post-pandemic, there's a huge amount of self-reflection around what's important in life. And we've seen a big group of individuals make the decision to get out of the rat race and prioritize a better work-life balance, spend more time with their family and flexibility. Even the hybridized work model that a lot of us are now living in, working from home and the office, or just purely working remotely, that has a huge correlation with freelancing. That's how freelancers have been doing it for years. And then we see, folks at 50 plus who are keen to, again, try and shift that way of working and living, and striking a balance, utilizing years of experience and skill to potentially generate the same or more income, or the income they require, whilst also taking more control of their life, getting more time back to do the things that they like to do outside of work. And I think that culture change, whereby it's now a very accessible model, be it as a side hustle, something you do part-time, or as a full-time freelance career, those pathways have really now become accessible to everybody, both practically through technology, but also culturally, where we now see it to be something that's accepted. Not in every country. That's another fascinating conversation. I think that those cultural differences around freelancing and the stigmas that are very much embedded in certain areas of the world. But for the UK, certainly I can speak on, and it sounds like Australia as well. We've done a little work there. We launched in New York about 8 months ago. So we know the US is obviously a very thriving space for entrepreneurialism. We're seeing just a really broad range of individuals that you wouldn't expect find freelancing and really take advantage of this moment.
So, looking at your platform, videographers, photographers, graphic designers, what sort of range of skills your freelancers offering?
So when we first launched, it was predominantly within the creative space, and you've listed a few of the professions there. And that was mainly due to our jobs board providing those opportunities in sectors like TV, film, fashion, music, beauty, these areas. So naturally, you will attract that type of industry. But in the past few years, we've doubled down on our educational and support features. We've launched a freelance business school. Right now is only an option for university partners, but within the next couple of weeks, we'll be going public with that, and that'll be open to everybody. And we also have 250 hours of on-demand short courses, whereby members can drop in and enroll in very quick, bite-sized chunks of information when they need it, which is the key part of that sentence. We've noticed that if you try and bombard a freelancer who needs to know 101 things, bombard them too soon, it'll overwhelm and they become disengaged. So we've made sure that the courses are there when you need them. They are plentiful, they're short, they're jargon free, and all of our educational and support features are completely accessible to everybody and universal. And what that's done is it's seen a really great opening up of diverse professions and individuals joining the club. And so, everybody from lawyers to nurses, pilots, and architects are coming on board to join our creative community. And it's wonderful. It brings a really fantastic sense of diverse thinking and interesting collaborations. For the first time with our educational tools, we've been able to open it up to countries outside of the US and the UK. That's also brought a wonderful cultural diversity. And we're getting to learn and understand some of the challenges that individuals have in different countries, but also open up opportunities for our members to fly around the world and connect with another member when they land in a new city.
People from all over the world can join, or you've got little branches in each country or something?
Yeah, so anybody can join. Anybody can tap into what's called our academy features. So any of the educational or support features that are on the website, they can join and take full advantage of those. And we have a specific membership that they can take to do that. And then as a point of connecting with other members, the site is really useful to source and find other freelancers in your area. And so what we've noticed a lot of members are doing is they'll use the site to find other freelancers, not necessarily for work, just as part of the membership and as a means of a conversation. And then often they'll meet up for a coffee and go and have a chat, and they'll build out an actual support network of other freelancers, as they may not have friends or family working in that same place, and they might feel quite isolated. And equally, we've heard stories of members who will fly to another country for work or for vacation and seek out another member who's located in that city. And because there's that commonality of both being members of the Freelancer Club, it breaks down that initial awkwardness and meet for a pint or a coffee and have a chinwag about all things freelance. And that's been cool hearing about those stories and how we're able to facilitate some of those connections.
That sounds wonderful. I'd highly recommend anyone to join just purely for the educational part of it. So you've got a job board in there, but that's mostly for England, is it?
Yeah. So right now it's focused in on the UK and New York specifically. And the reasoning behind that is the majority of our members would offer a face-to-face service. So for instance, if you're a photographer, the job has to be, within your radius that you're willing to travel. So it's not like a tech site or a membership that's dedicated to web developers, for example, where you can just flick a button, you can apply for any job anywhere in the world, and off you go. I'd say only around 20% of our jobs are remote and accessible to anybody, whereas the remainder would require you to be in that area. So with that in mind, we decided to hone in on a few key areas in the UK: London, Manchester, and Birmingham. Of course, we get a lot of organic jobs pop up outside of those areas, but they were our three main focuses. And then we launched in New York as well as our kind of first non-UK territory. We're posting a lot of work there as well. And we're a bootstrap company, so we've never had investments, and we don't have the luxury of being able to pump millions into advertising and marketing, which is what's needed if you really want to scale up your jobs board. With you'll see that on other marketplace websites, and I guess for us, yes, there's a jobs board, and we know a lot of our members do quite well out of the jobs board, but primarily that's not what we are. Primarily, we're a community, we're a resource, and particularly with our learning and support features, we're here to try and develop and nurture talent so that they can apply for jobs with us and anywhere else. I would never recommend somebody rely solely on one or two websites to try and feed their business. And that diversity of job opportunities and ways to find work, I think, is essential, to try and stay afloat and thrive. So that's really our major ambition, is to arm everybody, every member that joins with the skills, with the confidence, with the contacts to be able to go out there and land the gigs that they want in a multitude of areas.
Well, let's do a little bit on that. On some of the skills that, for example, somebody's working at the moment, they've had enough of their work, they've got some skills. What would you suggest they start before they quit their jobs? What sort of skills do you think they need to accumulate so that they can actually do a successful launch?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I would always recommend is grab a pen and paper and start jotting down some of your goals before diving into what's needed. I think too often folks are quick to just jump straight in and start hammering different marketing channels or, speaking to friends and family and finding jobs. And that can work. If we think back to my story, there was zero preparation and it was just a bull in a china shop. You're trying to figure it out as you go along. I definitely wouldn't recommend that approach. So just jotting down what those personal goals and objectives are for your particular situation. And the reason why I think it's essential is because freelancing is so unique and individual. We've already touched on some of the different individuals that might choose to go freelancing, but equally, it lends itself to that flexibility. And when you look at the top 5 reasons to go freelancing, they're often things like wanting to be your own boss or spend more time with the family or have that flexibility or work on projects that creatively satisfy you. They're not always, and in fact, very rarely are they financially motivated. So once you have the goals in place, that'll help you frame what skills and steps you need to achieve them because it's not a one size fits all with freelancing. But once you have established them, I think definitely a strong understanding of business essentials is a good starting place. I don't think there's a need to go too deep into this, but just some general concepts like return on investment, the idea of some form of marketing for sure, just an understanding of where you might go and find your clients. I think it's good to know what your pricing might look like, even just ballpark. A lot of people get hung up on pricing when in reality it really fluctuates and changes, sometimes daily for a lot of freelancers. They price based on project. But that's certainly something that you don't want to be stumbling around when it comes to a negotiation or when it comes time to have a meeting with a potential client. And then really just understanding your value. What is it that you're going to bring to your clients? Who are they? A bit of client analysis or audience profile, just an understanding. Where do they hang out? So, are you going to have to set up a range of social media channels? Is that where you're going to pick up work? Do you already have existing contacts from your 9 to 5 job? Can you leverage them? All of these little stepstones, I think, are good starting places for new freelancers thinking about getting into it. And then probably around 3 months savings, I would say, just to give you that buffer to be able to, figure it out while still, not feeling under pressure to pay rent and mortgages and bills and whatever else. But yeah, I do think it's just important not to try and put a template out there for everybody. It really is horses for courses. Certainly when I consult and when I coach freelancers on a one-to-one basis, that's always where we start. It's important to understand not just their goals, but their motivations. Because when it's lashing with rain outside, it's dark and you haven't gotten work in ages, you still need that drive to be able to get you out of bed and go find the clients again.
That's one of the toughest things I used to find when I didn't have work. You'd sort of almost get desperate. I only work on retainer now, and I've had some, nearly 10 years now. Still going, but that's my old work. Let's just talk about marketing for a bit. I've found that if you're going to work for yourself, you virtually have to focus on your marketing every day, even when you've got work. And it doesn't mean you've got to publish something, but you've got to be working on it. Are you finding, say, that once you're more experienced, you begin to realize that? Mind you, I run a marketing services company and I'm only really getting into it now in my 20th year. So really get stuck into this. But I'm realizing, boy, you've got to do this. But when I had started out, I don't think I would have known how to do any of this.
Yeah. Well, certainly the lack of know-how around marketing is a barrier for a lot of people. I mean, we very consciously put together freelance business school with a dedicated marketing course, baked into that for those reasons. But it's a big subject, If
Mm.
you think about a university student will probably take 4 years to get a degree in marketing. It's also a very volatile space. It's ever changing. New platforms come into the arena all the time. Algorithms change, rules change. Even for the most seasoned marketeer, I think it's actually quite a challenging space. So if you're a freelancer with no experience coming into it, I think it can feel very daunting, really daunting. And I don't think it has to be. I think if we zoom out a little bit and ask the question, what is marketing? What's its purpose? And you just really break it down to the lowest common denominator. It's essentially a tool to help us land clients. And that can be done in 100 ways. And actually, the more creative and less popular are probably a lot more efficient. With so many people, let me speak quickly on, say, the younger generation for a second, just to make this point. But, their instinct, if you're 18 to 25, will be to jump onto social media almost always with no plan or strategy and post content there that'll be typically promoting your service. So it'll be a very direct approach. And what will happen there is you'll invest a huge amount of time on a weekly basis on, say, Instagram or TikTok. And you might pick up the odd client here and there who sees your work and drops you a message, and you start that conversation. It's very reactive. I think it can work for someone who has a side hustle and doesn't have that need for regular income. I don't think it's a sustainable strategy unless you have an incredibly engaged audience. But there's just so many issues with that approach. We don't have time to go into them. But rather, if you look at your own, coming back to this bespoke idea, if you look at your own situation and say, okay, where is my market hanging out? Where are my clients hanging out? What if I start knocking on some shops in my local area? Is that a starting point? Because I know 99% of individuals won't do that. I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and do something far more traditional to try and drum up some business. And I think typically what we see in the marketing space with early stage freelancers is just a blanket approach to try a little bit of everything. And one piece of advice we always give is make sure you're measuring that, because the blanket approach isn't bad at all. It gives you a sense of what's going to work and what doesn't. But if you're not measuring it, it's just a scattergun approach and you'll never know what works and what doesn't. So long as you're trying, measuring, tweaking, and then either axing it if it's definitely not working or persevering with it if you think it has a chance, well, then that's a very progressive marketing strategy. And that can comprise anything from, social media to email mailers to just telling your mates that you've become a freelancer or knocking on doors in your local area. There's definitely not one system that's going to work for everybody. And often it's the cracks in the market and those little nuanced areas that you might not think of that tend to end up being the funnel to find work. And you only discover those through experimentation and trial and error.
That's the perfect way of doing it. It's try stuff. See what works. Otherwise it won't. The only problem is I think they've got to understand it has to be ongoing. And it doesn't always work straight away. And the danger is if they're impatient to earn money, they're going to be very frustrated. And I think you're right about the 3 months of work. I mean, it would even be better just to have a little part-time job. So bring some money in that you can pay your rent with and eat with, and then have enough time to focus on your business. You talked about the business side of it. A lot of them think they've got to go and see an accountant and they've got to do this and they've got to do that. Revenue is obviously the big thing, but often people say, well, how much should I spend on marketing? I know we've just spoken about marketing, but if you haven't got a lot of money, it's time, isn't it, really, that you've got to spend on it?
Yeah. Let's break it down, right? Every freelancer needs to know a little bit about a lot. You're the head marketing manager, you're the negotiator, the salesperson, the accountant, and that's before you do the actual work. That's before you do the thing that you're selling. In each of these cases, for every task that you have, If you were to write down a list of the things you need to do to launch your business, and then after that, the things you need to do to hit your goals and generate the money you need to survive and thrive, then each of those challenges, you've got three choices. Right? You do it yourself, you get someone else to do it, or you automate it. And that's a really nice sort of mantra to have when you start going through the checklist and say, right, I need to build a website. I can do it myself, no experience of doing that, but I could probably buy a template from Wix or one of these, off the shelf sites, and I could figure it out, and I might butcher it. Well, I'll learn a new skill, and that could take me 3 weeks. And how important is a website? It's probably pretty important. That's the thing that might make or break whether somebody decides to go with you or not. It shows your professionalism. It's pretty critical. And, let's say you're a plumber. It's not going to be your area of expertise. So maybe a better shout would be to get someone else to do it. So you're going to have to pay a professional. But if you don't have the money to do that, the third option is, okay, can we automate it? Is there an online tool that exists, be it AI or an automated system that can ease the burden of that process? That's the thought process I think that freelancers should go through on each of these key tasks as you set up your business. I mean, one trick is, once you figure out what your hourly rate is, anything under that, or let's say 50% under that. So if your hourly rate is 100 quid, $100 an hour, let's say any task that you deem to be $50 or below an hour, you should outsource, right? Because suddenly you're spending an hour, which is worth $100 on a task that you're no good at, and it's killing and eating up your day. So that's a good example of a business principle or business concept that I think is quite tricky to wrap your head around. To say, well, right, it's going to be better off for me to spend money on an expert than it is to tackle this myself over the next, say, 2 to 3 months. So it might not feel like it. It might feel like a waste of money right now. We're talking about it as you and I know about this, but I can tell you the vast majority of newer freelancers, they just don't have that concept in their head of return on investment or, spending to accumulate. It's just not there. So that's certainly something that I think all freelancers should consider when going through that checklist, and try and farm out as much of that stuff as you can and that you can afford and that makes sense to free up the time for you to be more valuable.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I think I use I've been on Upwork now for 14 years, and I regularly spend $200 or $300 a week. And it's great because I just don't have to sweat on it. But after all that time, I know who I employ. So I think when you first start out with outsourcing, you're just going to have to lose a bit of money because you're going to think, oh, that's a cheap job. But no, it can be a very expensive job if you think it's going to be cheap because you get the wrong person. But I love it. And because I often think, well, I'd rather read my book and do my writing than do that job that's just going to drive me nuts. I guess one of the other issues there too is in briefing. I know that your people are freelancers, so they're going to have a briefing given to them, but they've also got to learn to do a brief to bring in other freelancers to help them. So do you do stuff on that as well?
Yeah, we've got a short course on that, and it's such a good point. Freelancers hire freelancers. I don't think we talk about that as much as we should, but we've seen that a lot. A lot of our members use our jobs board to find other freelancers to do work for their freelance business. And it's awesome. That really is the power of the community and shows how we can all support each other and come together. And if we think about somebody who wants to set up a startup business, you've had an idea, it's unique to the world, you want to change the world in some way, you'll probably need to raise investment. Let's say you need a couple of $1 million to get started in terms of putting together a whole team of people and building the platform and an app and all the technology that goes under the hood there. And so that's a kind of typical journey of a startup. A freelancer tends to not need much at all to get started in terms of capital. You may need to purchase some equipment. Most freelancers will already have that in play. Often it's a phone or maybe a computer and a bit of kit. But after that point, it's ongoing costs. or you're, as we've been discussing, you're farming stuff out to other people. And then I think once it comes to writing a brief, theoretically, freelancers should be fairly well versed on that because they've been on the other side of it. They typically, if you've applied for a few jobs, you can recognize a good and a bad brief. And there are a few things to be cognizant of when doing that. And being as detailed orientated as possible helps. Making sure you're managing expectations, getting your rates and the value of the project right, I think is essential. That's something we see all the time. There's a lot of naivety when it comes to hiring freelancers in terms of their worth. So we have jobs on our board posted by businesses and people from the general public. So for instance, if someone needs a photographer for a wedding, probably have never had to put a brief together before for a photographer. And so this, it is often fairly challenging. And certainly when it comes to knowing how much they should be spending on a photographer in that space, you might do a bit of research online, but you might not know. And that's what we found is quite common, is both a fairly weak brief. And by weak, I mean it lacks detail and it requires the freelancer to ask many more questions before they can properly quote. And then a normally undervalued rate, where they may not fully appreciate the amount of work that has to go on, even before and after the actual process and the actual project itself. And that's something that we do a lot of work on here in terms of educating and coaching the client side as well, to make sure that there's a little more understanding as to what a fair rate looks like. So yeah, I think that's a skill in itself. And I think it's something that when you get good at, you can often use parts of it again and again. You might mention a few bits and pieces about yourself or your freelance business in terms of values or culture. Those things won't change. And then outside of that, you'll pad it with the actual project brief and description of what you want to achieve. The other tip I would give on this is try and use, if it's a visual project, use examples frequently as possible. And if you can visually show the freelancer what you're trying to accomplish, it really gives the freelancer a much better understanding of the client expectation so that they can either meet those expectations or have a discussion to say, I'm not Martin Scorsese. We're going to have to think about how this looks at the end. So, certainly it's a skill. Yeah. It's a great point you bring up, but I think it's something, more freelancers would benefit from understanding.
I learned it the hard way. We're almost going to do number one, do this. Number two, otherwise you'd never get it. But the other interesting one there that I was thinking, in terms of value, setting a minimum price and say, look, I'm not going to go anywhere near a job. I guess once you know what you're doing and what your value is, say, look, my minimum charge is $1,000 or $10,000. And that's the danger. You'll attract people who are not willing to pay that sort of money. So I guess that's positioning again in terms of marketing, that I work in this range of prices. If you can't pay that, I'm not even going to consider it. I'd rather sleep in that morning or something like that, or it won't get you out of bed. I mean, that's the sort of value. And I think one of the big issues you're finding is these people who expect people do stuff for nothing, and then they might give you some work, which would never occur anyway. So how do you think about, setting a value and saying, well, I don't work under that?
Yeah, I think most freelancers who have been around for a while, they get there eventually. That takes quite a lot of confidence and a bit of, a bit of know-how in your own self and the value that you provide a client. But it definitely weeds out the bad clients. And, make no mistake, there are bad clients out there. So if there's a market for your service and you're confident that enough individuals or companies are going to pay for that, it makes perfect sense to position yourself with a threshold and one that you won't go below. I think that's smart business sense. Where we see some of the mistakes, would be freelancers who are going in with that attitude, but have really overvalued themselves and are struggling to find any work. So, you're always looking for the sweet spot. Is there a market for your service and how much are people willing to pay? The more common pricing model we see is freelancers undervaluing themselves in the first couple of years, typically because there's a fear that they're not going to get any work. And we end up with a race to the bottom because you have a bunch of folks out there all undercutting each other for the same job out of fear, because they think that price is the most important component and consideration that a client thinks about when choosing who to hire, which it isn't. Quality of work statistically is always number one. Price is the second. So I think it's easier said than done. If I was speaking to a freelancer 5 years into the game and we could start to talk about how to position yourself to ensure you're not attracting bad clients and you are getting paid what you're worth, it's a lot easier than having that conversation with someone in their first year, still very worried about, landing clients, creating that experience, building up their know-how and their network. There's an interesting option out there when it comes to pricing, which is called value-based pricing. And it moves away from a set hourly or day rate concept. And what, in effect, you're trying to do is discover how valuable your service is to a company or to a client. So if we think of an example, you might have a graphic designer and someone in their family asks them to design some sort of email signature that's going to sit at the bottom of each of their emails. And it'll take this designer, I don't know, a day or two to put that together. But it's very low value for the client, for the friend in that instance. It might make their emails look more professional, but it's probably not going to make or break anything. That same graphic designer might get asked to design a billboard for a £20 million marketing campaign that will be seen all over the world. And it's going to be used across the board on a big company's push to generate more sales and brand awareness. Well, then, that design, which might take the same amount of time as the email signature, has a far greater value to the client, And so when having these discussions with clients and talking about the project, if you can ask some questions as a freelancer to determine how is my work going to impact your business and what sort of value is my work going to bring to your company? Another way to put it is, what problem am I solving? So you're not a photographer taking photos of a fashion collection. You are producing professional images that are going to increase sales. So the problem you're solving is we have a lack of sales, and you, the photographer, you're going to increase the sales and solve the problem. So how we position ourselves and how we pitch and brand ourselves, whilst also better understanding where our value lies amongst our clients, can have a transformative impact on how much you earn, how much you charge, and how much you have to work as a freelancer.
I read a chap called Blair N's book on value pricing and stuff like that, and he's quite brilliant on it. The issue there is, having that conversation and then finding out really what it's worth. So if you're going to bring in $1 million revenue for them or more, you don't do that for a couple $100 or several £100. I mean, it's probably worth $100,000 even, but not many people are going to be brave enough to ask that unless they're one of the big agencies. And I guess that's the issue of being a freelancer. And that pricing issue, it was always an issue for me. I was wondering, how much do you charge for that? I mean, I've built websites and I've been told, well, if it was the public service when they did it, last time they did it, they paid $80,000. And you've just done a $2,000 website and you go, you just don't know, do you really? So I pity beginner freelancers, but I think you've mentioned that some of those freelancers are starting in the universities and they're young and they're able to find out what they can get. So some of those ones who've been, freelancing from 16 might have a better idea how to do this than some of the older ones, like, when I was 30 or 40 going out to freelancing.
Yeah, potentially. I think it's more about, we talked about skill set. We talked about, what freelancers need before they get going. This is a really interesting one, so it's not sales. It's not necessarily negotiation. It's communication, I think. It's effective communication. So if you and I are having a conversation and you want to hire me, my approach would be much more of a collaborative tone. I'd want to get to know your business. I'd want to understand why you want to hire me. I wouldn't be that direct, but that kind of why question helps me get a better understanding of the problem you need solving, the value of that, and where I could potentially add even more value because I'm the expert and you don't know. So they're questions that I think are incredibly progressive when it comes to value-based pricing, and also a more collaborative and fulfilling experience. You'll be more invested in the brand that you're working for and the project, as opposed to just hard selling yourself, doing a job and walking away. There's a huge amount of merit in getting to look under the hood of a particular project and better understanding the mechanics of a business and how it all pieces together. So you could say, right, like this website I'm going to build, what's it going to do? And it's going to help market the rest of the company. And what does that company look like? And I think from a client's perspective, they really appreciate that type of conversation. It's almost a hybrid consultancy, marketing, sales conversation. You are swimming around these worlds where you're asking more questions to get to know not only a bit more about the project so that you can quote accurately, but also kind of get a buy-in for yourself. Freelancers often have multiple clients. You got to switch hats quite a lot. And something we're seeing a lot more of is freelancers gravitating towards projects that align with their values. It's not all about money. It's often to do with job satisfaction or working for a company that's doing good. These are high priority considerations when it comes to choosing the clients. And I think only through meaningful conversation, smart questions, can you ultimately discover if it's a good fit.
Yeah, no, totally agree there. And I think you hits on the nail when you said the client doesn't always know what they want. Because they're hiring the freelancer because the freelancer is the expert. And the freelancer's got to realize, yes, I am the expert in the sense that they are the prize. And yeah, do the diagnosis. And often it's worth charging for that, because if you don't do it and you end up doing what they think that they want, they're not going to be satisfied either. But yeah, you need the gift of the gab to be able to do that. Well, what about some of the things that are coming up, do you think? I know that one thing I've become very much aware of in the last couple of months is AI, ChatGPT. I'll be honest, I have lots of subscriptions to AI programs. One I use for the podcasting that will, after I've edited this podcast using an editor called Descript, I send that off to one of my freelancers. He sends it back. Then I put it on to Swell AI, which will give me a whole lot of broken up show notes and everything like that. I use ChatGPT multiple times during the day to help me write a conclusion to something or make a distinction between things. Are you seeing much in the AI now affecting freelancing or your freelancers? What do you see happening there?
Yeah, we've seen a fair bit of movement. I mean, I'll just speak kind of anecdotally on, I guess, around November, December, when ChatGPT started to come more into focus from a consumer perspective. And, we saw it having a big impact on our writing community, marketing experts, folks that would typically have content at the heart of their service, written content, that is. And it's 100% impacted their client base. And I've read a lot around AI. I'm really curious about this field. I use it like you. I use it every day and have been involved in various aspects of AI for many, many months. And so would, welcome any new tech. But a lot of what I'm reading, it talks about adaptation and the need for freelancers to adapt. And, you can switch gears quite easily and adapt your service and move forward. That may have been true with, older technology that takes a little bit of while to permeate through into kind of general use. But just the speed and the rapid rise of ChatGPT in particular, and I guess all of the other apps and tools that are out there that do something similar, unfortunately have resulted in a lot of individuals losing clients overnight. And not that easy to adapt and switch your services with very little preparation time and at that speed. So unfortunately, we've seen quite a large percentage of those particular sectors take a heavy hit. Certainly within the writing space, anybody who is producing what we call evergreen content, so content that, is not necessarily trending or news based, but can sit there indefinitely, that's almost completely wiped out. ChatGPT does such a good job at that. And then on a more positive note, we've seen a lot of freelancers use it as a co-pilot. They'll bring in various AI tools to automate a lot of the bits and pieces that they do for their business and sometimes within their service as well. We spoke about it before about do it yourself, outsource it, or automate it. And now with ChatGPT, you can have that open and it can really expedite a lot of those repetitive tasks that a freelancer has to do on a daily basis. So even sort of job proposals or replies to email, I mean, that's just scraping the surface. We have image and video generation AI, which is getting rapidly more advanced and impressive. That'll start to impact individuals who operate in that space. And yeah, I think there's in equal measure excitement and fear amongst the community when it comes to AI. And I guess just the sheer speed in which it's all coming to play is quite tricky to keep up with.
Oh yeah, I think it's fascinating. Though I've got to be honest, I have to heavily edit anything that GPT produces for me, and I'm pretty good with the prompts now. And I do feed it with a lot of research because if you come across Roam research, it's a relational database where you put all your notes in and tag them and all that. I can pull lots of notes out, feed it in, and get ChatGPT to help me write something. But then I've just got to work it so hard to make it say what I want and personalize it. So I don't think ChatGPT is really going to replace a good copywriter. Yeah, on the cheap maybe, but definitely not good copy anyway. So that's
Yeah.
the issue there is if you're good at what you're doing and you're going to augment yourself with ChatGPT, you're going to be even better.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think we're going to see folks stacking up now. That seems to be the trend. I think anybody who was coming in at a low level producing work that was very much in that kind of lower echelon will be out of a game, which does put more pressure on aspiring and new freelancers. I think it really emphasizes the importance of supporting freelancers and providing them with the necessary skills to be able to speed up that learning process so that they go from being good to great a lot quicker than they used to in the past. There just isn't that time anymore to be mediocre. The entire kind of stack has gone up a level. We did some research recently and we found out that the average time it takes for a freelancer to become sustainable is around 18 months. And one of our big ambitions at the club and a campaign we launched this year called Rise Freelancer really aims to try and shorten that runway. So
Yeah.
we think 18 months it's a hell of a long time. And typically the reason why it takes so long is because you're figuring all this stuff out that we're talking about. You're figuring out how to run a business, how to pay tax, cash flow, everything. There is a list as long as our arm. So how do we provide freelancers with the skills and the know-how to be able to get there quicker? And I think AI has further put pressure on us shortening that runway. Because I think when you were a freelancer a few years ago, you could probably get away with picking up some low-hanging fruit. There's a few jobs that experienced freelancers wouldn't be interested in. So newer, less experienced folks would take those jobs. They wouldn't charge a lot for them. But it gives you a few things. It gives you a little income, but it also gives you confidence, experience. It puts another name on your CV, and it also gives you that sense of validation that really cannot be underestimated. How important that is to think, wow, somebody's paid me for my service for the first time, and they're not a friend or a family. That's an amazing moment. So that's now in jeopardy for some, not all. But AI is certainly stepping in and taking a lot of that work away. And yeah, we really now need to emphasize the importance of getting up to speed as quickly as possible as a freelancer to bypass those kind of early stages and grab some early money.
I know it's very scary going out, but it's also pretty well fantastic when you do get some good work. That's the main thing. I think when I was talking to John Younger, he was saying, look, it can be patchy. And I guess that's where a lot of the freelance platforms comes in so that hopefully people will get work. But I think what he was saying is 10 to 20% of people on the freelance platforms get work. The rest has to, seek it outside as well, or both. But the freelance program I use, which is Upwork, I make sure I pay everybody a reasonable wage. And then I will tell them, you're not allowed to do a 15-minute job and charge me 15 minutes. You've got to charge me up for the full hour. because it's ridiculous to charge me for 15 minutes, like $5. I'll refuse to pay that. I'll make sure I pay the next hourly rate up, or I'll come to an agreement with them about a reasonable cost. But it's got to be sustainable. And I don't care where they are in the world, even if that's a high rate for where they live. I mean, I have a chap, he's fabulous, who works in Vietnam, and I generally have an issue and I want it fixed. It might take him 10 minutes, but I'll put $30 US in his account. That's a lot of money in Vietnam, but I'm happy because I know he's an expert and he knows I'm going to give him $30, even if it's 1 minute. And it can take him a couple of minutes to fix because he's that good. I value that. It's probably the most important thing in the world to me because I do not want to be stressed about stuff. And that's the value of a freelancer. He knows what they're doing. Our issue is to find them. And that's where marketing comes in, because they've got to be able to tell us that I'm the one who could do that. It's all very circular there. So, all right, we're coming probably close to the end there. Is there something you've got coming up? You've got a project coming up that you're running, or was it the Rise Freelancers you were going to talk about?
Rise Freelancer. This is a big passion project of mine and the company's. We decided to launch this as a response to the number of freelancers that were failing, particularly in their first year. There's about 20% are dropping off in the first year. And that percentage skyrockets up. If you look at the first 5 years, it gets up to about 60%. So, more freelancers are failing than making it over a few year period. And that's just heartbreaking. So if we couple that with the knowledge that so many individuals want to get into freelancing, it's been a growing trend for years, pandemic aside, where the graph has just shot up, and all of the future of work conversations surround this concept of flexibility and mobility, and the idea of being able to do something you love and not be caught up in this 9-to-5 grind and an industrial era model that seems incredibly antiquated in 2023. And so we wanted to put this campaign together to try and combat that. So the mission we set ourselves is to provide 1 million individuals with free business training and support by 2026. We've recently hit 300,000, so we're ahead of schedule. And that's testament to the appetite out there of individuals wanting to get into this market. And what that does is it helps us reduce the failure rate, which is great, but it also creates pathways for individuals in marginalized communities, individuals who may have felt freelancing is untenable or unrealistic. We want to break down those barriers for those individuals. And it also addresses the stigma and helps change the culture around freelancing to be much more aligned with its true value. When I started freelancing, it was seen as a stopgap. It's just something you did until you got a real job in air quotes. And now it's a very aspirational, viable career choice or a way of life. So the Rise Freelancer campaign is there to ensure that everybody, regardless of your financial situation, regardless of your background, has access to business. So we're working a lot with universities, with charities, social enterprises, and with companies. We're very fortunate. We've had corporate companies come in and support and back different cohorts of individuals to get free access. And from a Freelancer Club's perspective, we waive all of our costs, and we ensure that that access is free to everybody who needs it. What we're seeing as a result, even in these early stages, is an amazing transformative process from an individual that really comes in highly talented, but with very little knowledge about running a business, to be independent and confident in going out there and achieving their freelance goals. And as we've been discussing, shortening the runway from moment of launch into becoming sustainable and ensuring that freelancing can be a part of their working lives. So we're very excited about this, and we welcome any of your listeners to reach out and get in touch, whether a freelancer looking for more information and support, a charity that would like to come on board and they have individuals that require help, or a company that wants to align their brand with this campaign and and help support the next generation of freelancers. We're having some really wonderful conversations at the moment and would welcome others to join.
Recommend that to anyone I can. So where do they find out about that program?
So the easiest way is to get onto freelancerclub.net. We have a dedicated page under our resources section called Rise Freelancer, or you can Google Rise Freelancer and I think we'll pop up. Freelancer Club will pop up in one of the first 2 listings. And then from there, all the information will help guide them through, depending on who you are and what role you'll play in the campaign. And yeah, very much keen to open this up internationally as well. So great to have the opportunity to speak to you and hopefully some folks based in Australia who are interested in developing this whole space. We think this really has a huge amount of merit globally. And for us to achieve this goal and to help bring this movement to as many people as possible, it's essential that we do open it up and have conversations with folks from all over the world.
Oh, that's fantastic. And the other thing about that is that if there is a place or several places in Australia who want to do that, it's better that they don't try and reinvent the wheel. If you've got the experience and the knowledge and the skills that you guys have got, that's going to help, a lot of other people. I mean, you've done the hard yards there. Right, so is there anything else we need to talk about? I think we've covered a lot about freelancing and the fabulous work that your club's doing. I just wish something like that was around 20 years ago when I was at there, just flailing around. So thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation. So thank you very much for talking. We've got freelancerclub.net, so we'll put that in the show notes and everything. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Nigel. Cheers.
I'm excited to continue providing you with engaging and informative episodes that will help you level up in your entrepreneurial journey. Once again, thank you for tuning into the Wisepreneurs podcast. Stay tuned and I'll catch you in the next one.